a discussion on caste in India. Caste, as you know, is a social arrangement. It's a hierarchical arrangement that is unique and very peculiar to Indian society. It has very complex attributes and arrangements which has made it a subject of study among the sociologists, among travelers and people who visited India from time immemorial. It has a functional caste as a system is a very complex in the sense that at one level there is a functional dependency between various levels and statuses within the caste system, and also at the same time there is a high degree of subjugation and exploitation and domination as well. So in that sense it becomes a very complex system, and over the years it has seen many trajectories over history, and much later when the British came to India it has seen a few changes, and of course post independence it has lent itself to democratic politics, to electoral politics, that is, and so we do see caste expressing itself in various forms and aspects. With us in the studio is Professor T.N. Madan, a very eminent scholar, a sociologist, a professor emeritus at the Institute of Economic Growth. Recently he received a Lifetime Achievement Award of the Sociological Society. His areas of specialization include social structure, sociology of religion and secularization. Today he will talk to us about these very many different aspects of caste. Welcome Professor T.N. Madan, and thank you very much for coming to our studios. I would like to pose this question straight away, and that is what is caste? I mean, I think maybe we should start from there, and perhaps you could throw some light on how it has been studied by some of the prominent scholars and sociologists.
Yes, we could begin with that. Well, as you indicated in your introductory remarks, there's a sense in which caste can be said to be the defining feature of Indian society. Look at any aspect of Indian society, look at the economy, look at the polity, look at religion, look at social arrangements that you talked about. Caste enters into each one of these. It's a unique institution in the sense that there's nothing quite like it anywhere else in the world, now or ever in history. But what is it? Volumes and volumes and volumes have been written about what is caste. But let's cut through that vast amount of literature to focus on some very obvious characteristics of caste. It's about group identity, and this group identity is something which is not achieved but inherited. People pass on caste identities to their children. There may be slight shifts in caste identity as a result of marriage. Wives may, if they marry outside the caste and marry above their own caste of birth, then they may acquire the caste identity of the husband. But broadly speaking, caste identities are ascribed, are inherited. Caste groups or hereditary groups. To maintain this kind of a closed character, it's obvious that marriage is usually within the caste. They do allow, tradition does allow some intermarriage between castes which are very closely linked to each other, even between religious communities, like Jains and Hindus marrying. But usually a woman would never be married off into a caste which ranks lower than that of a parent. Endogamy is there, then there is occupational specialization. A goldsmith's son is a goldsmith, a priest's son is a priest. There are family traditions of knowledge and technique which are closely guarded. So we get this, not only the inheritance of group membership, but the inheritance of occupation. A very interesting feature of caste-based society is association of caste groups with various kinds of food taboos.
Yes.
Vegetarianism,
Yes.
for instance, is characteristic of the upper caste people. Also, power distribution. Some people are not only lower caste in terms of the work they do, but also in terms of being denied any access to the power structure of the community. And as you said yourself, the whole system is characterized by grading of groups along a vertical axis, a kind of a hierarchy. I should like to say straight away two things here. One is, when we talk of caste, we're using an English word which has a Portuguese kind of beginning. It's difficult to clearly indicate what is meant by caste because of the confusion between Varna and Jati.
Yes.
We have this large fourfold division of society which goes back to the Rig Veda, of society comprising Brahmins and Kshatriyas and Vaishyas and Shudras, priests and warriors and kings and merchants and tradesmen and artisans and service communities. Now this is better thought of in terms of an overarching framework rather than the caste system on the ground. When we talk of the caste system on the ground, we are talking of jatis,
Yes.
of which there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and there are regional variations. The kind of regional caste structure you may get in South India, you may not get in Bengal, you may not get in Western India. So there are regional caste
Yes.
systems. But traditionally these regional systems have been fitted into this overarching Varna system. The second thing that I would like to mention straight away is that contrary to what people think, there has been some mobility within the caste system, never on individual basis. An individual can never rise. An individual can fall if you transgress caste rules, if you violate what is expected of you in terms of behavior, then you can be thrown out. You become an outcast. You don't become a member of another caste. But generally speaking, groups try to rise. They try to raise themselves within the caste system. Upward mobility. There have been instances of communities which have over the years, over generations, improved their caste ranking. We're talking about the gradation. Where in the rank order do you fit in a particular caste?
Could you have any example in mind?
Well, there is a community, for instance, in UP, called large community of Uttar Pradesh, called Caste.
Yes.
Now, castes are supposed to be the result of marriage between upper caste and lower caste people. And the castes were usually regarded as low caste. But over the decades, they are regarded nowadays as belonging with the upper ranks of society. There are castes in Bengal also, who have their own place in their caste structure. And peculiar things can happen. I know of a community in Karnataka who at first wanted to be regarded as higher than they were. At the moment the name escapes me, but they wanted to be called Brahmins. But when caste reservations came,
They did.
They said, no, we are not Brahmins, we are down below. So these little games are played. But the thing to remember is that in any such system, there would be an effort to improve one's social standing. Sociologists they sometimes call this reference group behavior. You have a reference group with relation to whom
You want to.
you try to improve your status. The very distinguished Indian sociologist Aben Srinivas, he called it Sanskritization, that lower caste people begin to adopt the practices of upper caste people, people following Sanskritic rituals. For instance, with regard to initiation ceremony, performing it though it is not traditional to that caste, or widow remarriage, not allowing it although it is traditional to that caste. To do both these things because the Brahmins do it. So you have this Brahmanization or Sanskritization. There may be other reference groups, and not necessarily only Brahmins. Now, one more thing to remember about the caste system is that, like any other social formation, it has had an ideological backdrop, and that's Brahmanical. The ideology is very much Brahmanical. It has been said that if there is any idea at all which can be called a dogma within the Hindu religion, it's the idea of karma, that whatever you do has consequences, and these consequences, the fruits of action, must be enjoyed or suffered, and this may not be possible to complete this process of enjoyment of the fruits or suffering the fruits of bad actions in one lifetime. So the notion of karma goes hand in hand with the notion of samsara, transmigration. And this is the ideological backdrop. The very distinguished sociologist Max Weber once wrote that human history knows of no other doctrine which so frontally answers the question of how can there be injustice in the world. The answer is we are the makers of our own future, of our fate in terms of justice being meted out to us. We enjoy the fruits of good actions, we suffer the consequences of bad actions. You said how has caste been explained? Well, early on, the beginning of the 20th century, lots of people, colonial administrators and others, tried to link it to race. That this must have something to do with the fact that India obviously has many kinds of racial elements. People talk of half a dozen, people mention at least half a dozen racial elements in Indian population. Or people try to link it to modes of social organization. Caste may have come out of the imposition of patriarchal modes of social organization on matriarchal modes of social organization. Now, those who thought race was crucial, they tried to produce biometric evidence. By biometric evidence, I mean you measure the head, or you take the shape and size of the nose and calculate something that the biologists call the nasal index. You do measurements of the head, craniometry. Now, what they ultimately tried to say was that those castes which are close to each other in social ranking are also close to each other in terms of these biometric indices. But this has fallen by the way. People don't pay much attention to this any longer. The other viewpoint which held the ground for a long time was that caste was ultimately about occupation, occupational specialization. Then there were those people who said caste is about religious values, purity and pollution, that some groups, by virtue of what they eat, what work they do, from whom they are born, are ritually impure, and some are pure, and the caste system is ultimately the key idea is ultimately based on the key idea of ritual purity and pollution. The other source, it's all about power.
Yeah.
That you see, power is distributed unequally. People have land, have more power than people who are artisans, and people who have professional competence to offer services like priests, they have more power. So there is this whole issue of distribution of power. In this regard, I might mention that explanations of caste have often been put in one of two boxes: attributional theories of caste, in terms of attributes like endogamy, like specialization of occupation, like food taboos and so on. These are attributes of a group. But many sociologists have shown that it works up differently on the ground. Ultimately, where you stand in the caste hierarchy is dependent upon the kinds of interaction arrangements you are able to work out.
Okay.
So that people who go by textual sources go more along the attributional explanation, explanation in terms of attributes, and people who go into field work and find out what is happening, they go by the interactional approach. Who gives food to whom, who accepts from whom. This may be very different from what the text says.
Yes.
Or who marries whom, or who follows what occupation. So we have traditionally a system which has a broad framework, the Varna system, within which there are the thousands of jatis, and these jatis have different attributes. But these are not frozen entities. These arrange themselves, these jatis arrange themselves in the social hierarchy in ways that is beneficial to them, that seems meaningful to them.
Would you say then that there could be a combination of viewpoints where some of these attributes meet in their actual practices in terms of interactions? Is it possible? I'm just asking.
Yes,
a related.
but there's a tension. There is a tension there.
Yeah.
Those who are deprived would always like at least to lessen the degrees of deprivation. Those who are the privileged would like to protect their privileges. So there's a tension there, which is to be seen even today in the 21st century. Things have changed with regard to the caste system. The caste system in the Vedic period, or in the medieval times, or in the modern times, it has a history.
Yes. Now we're talking about history, would you say a few things about how the West, I mean the West, people who had come to India as colonial administrators and as missionaries, how has that impacted on the way caste system got to be practiced and the arrangement itself?
Enormous, and interestingly differentiated. The Western impact on a sustained basis can be said to begin in the 18th century. And the two main agents of the West, if I may use the word agent, were the missionary, the Christian missionary, and the colonial administrator. Of course, Christian missionaries had come here before the 18th century. The task of the missionaries obviously was to convert, and therefore they tried two strategies. One strategy was to highlight the iniquities of the caste system. Look at the Christian community. Everybody is equal in the eyes of God, and treat your neighbor like yourself. That kind of an ethic. And look at the caste system. Here there are people who are treated as dead. There are people who, irrespective of their personal merit, have all the social privileges. So one line of attack which the missionaries mounted was to denounce the caste system as an iniquitous system, as a blight, as something morally unacceptable. Another approach which some of the earlier missionaries tried was to say that Christianity represented the best in Hinduism and the best in Brahmanical culture. So some of these early missionaries like Roberto di Nobili in the early 17th century, they tried to convert Brahmins.
Yes.
And Roberto di Nobili, I've seen pictures of him wearing a Brahmanical robe and a holy thread and so on. So you can say that Indians were made conscious of caste system as something which needed to be changed or defended or attacked. Here I should mention that though we talk of Hindus primarily when we talk of the caste system, it is good to remember that caste-like features are exhibited by all communities.
Yes.
The Muslims also do, showing a strong occupational profile, which is like the caste system.
You mean the Muslims in India or Muslims
Muslims
in
in
general?
India, I
Okay,
mean,
yeah.
because they are converts.
Yeah.
Or the Sikhs, for
Yeah.
instance. So I just wanted to say this on the side that though because of the shortage of time we may not be able to go into the details of caste among Muslims or Sikhs, but it is to be found in all communities. Now going back to what we were saying, so the missionaries attacked the caste system. Mostly by saying that it was something which was awful and wicked, and Christianity was the sublime religion, the decent religion which offered a place to everybody in the social order. The administrators were less concerned about the moral side. The administrators were more concerned about the instrumental use of caste. And there are historians and sociologists who have spoken about the construction of a colonial archive, by which they mean that particularly after the mutiny, the so-called mutiny or the First War of Independence, British colonial administrators devoted a great deal of attention to highlighting internal divisions within Indian society. So they began giving us detailed accounts. These had actually begun in the 18th century itself, of tribes and castes of India. The more divided Indian society, the less likely the emergence of a unified and unifying national movement. But talking about the impact of the British, that's not all there is to the story. The British did many things purely for their own colonial interests. So the railways, factory production. Not only the British, but Indians, seeing what the British were doing, tried to do the same. If the British opened jute factories in Bengal, you had Indian entrepreneurs going into cotton production in Western India. Then you had the Tatars going into steel in Jamshedpur more than 100 years ago. So the British presence in India meant certain changes in the economy. This meant that you began to have a sense of class formation, a national bourgeoisie, a capitalist class, comprising say Parsis, Marwadis and other entrepreneurial groups, a working class. With British education in the middle of the 19th century in Calcutta and Bombay, in Madras, with the colleges offering courses in law, in medicine, you began to have a professional middle class. Now the emergence of a capitalist economy, the beginnings of a capitalist economy, the formation in a very, very limited and you can say immature manner, but the emergence of a class system with a middle class. Now this in various ways started eroding the earlier solid and absolutely entrenched position of the caste system. So British rule had an impact. Travel, mobility, people could go from one part of India to another. You're traveling on a train and you don't ask the person sitting next to you, what's your caste?
Yes.
Factory workers. Well, a factory worker once told in Kerala, told an anthropologist, when the anthropologist asked him, you are a Brahmin, how do you manage working with non-Brahmins as a factory worker? He said, in the morning I take off my caste and put on my factory uniform. In the evening I take off the uniform and put on my caste. So the impact was varied. And there were responses on the social level also. There were religious reform movements which denied caste, like the Arya Samaj.
You know, Professor Madan, I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I think this will be a very brief introduction to the caste system in India for our students and for the general audience. Perhaps we might want to wind up very soon. So if you could sum up this point in maybe a couple of sentences.
The one about the impact.
Yes.
Well, as I said, there were, you know, groups like reform movements like the Arya Samaj movement, which completely denied the relevance or the validity or the sanctity of the caste system. There were people like Gandhi, who said the Varna system, the Varna order makes sense, but the caste system has decayed into something not good. It can be reformed, and he fought very hard for the removal of untouchability. And then there were people like B.R. Ambedkar, who said reject the whole thing, lock, stock and barrel. You cannot reform this system. So all these reactions can be said, whether we like it or not, to have come following the impact of the West.
Thank you for this very brief introductory discussion and your insights on the caste system in India. Thank you very much for coming to our studios. Thank you very much.
Thank you.